Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me here to give you some guidelines and tips for conducting a literature review. This should come in handy in this course as your main project is to come up with a topic, find articles that use single case research design to evaluate interventions for students with and receiving special education. So this can help you understand the process and have an idea about how to get the most accurate information as a consumer of research and a researcher. Let's get started. Believe it or not, reviewing literature is a really great use of your time. According to Woolery and Lane, a careful research review allows you to discover what is known about a topic that is important to you. You can learn how it has been studied, what measures and what designs were used, what were the implications for practice and policy, what factors qualify or limit those findings, and what questions were answered. Reviewing the literature also allows you to develop an argument for doing a specific study. In this course, that's the purpose of your lit review. You're identifying a topic that you're interested in answering questions about effectiveness. So first, we're going to look up some articles that use the single case research design to evaluate interventions or behavior change that interest you. So by gathering previous research, you're going to be able to find studies that can support that procedure. And you can look at the variations in the procedures that make it easy to apply, the various behaviors that can be measured, and the designs that most appropriately evaluate your intervention and answer your research question. So obviously, the first step here is going to be select your topic. How do you know what to choose? Where do you begin? The most important factor in selecting your topic is going to be interest. Well, if you're not sure exactly what your interest is, I have a few suggestions. Perhaps you start reading about the field you're interested in. Pick up a textbook or find a few recent journals that have articles in them. You could flip through, read the abstract for each article, and see if anything piques your interest. Some practitioner journals that I find useful are Teaching Exceptional Children, or Beyond Behavior, or Focus on Autism and Developmental Disorders. That's a research-based journal that can give you a lot of great ideas for your interest. Or if you might also need some help, you can talk to some people in the field and find out what kind of relevant issues they're finding. Maybe some hot topics or some particular interventions that they think they have that really work. So you can find your interest, and then you want to move on to making sure that there's literature on the topic. It will be useful to do an initial search in the Piedmont Library System using EBSCO or another search engine in the Galileo, but you want to start thinking about the interventions you're interested in, the behaviors you would like to see change, or the population of students that you want to explore. You want to make sure that you don't have too broad of a topic and that you can narrow your search down to fewer than 30 articles. So how can we do that? There are a few components that you can narrow in your search by making sure you're searching for peer-reviewed articles. You are limiting the years of time for publication to make them more recent. You might list a few questions about the topic, and you can consider the components that you're interested in. What is the specific intervention? What are the behaviors you're looking to change? And who are the participants that you want to narrow it down? So There you get your start. Then you want to find your relevant sources. In order to find the relevant sources, it's important that you determine your inclusion and exclusion criteria. Which articles are you going to include? Well, you want to make sure that you're getting peer-reviewed articles. So you want to make sure that the journal is reputable and has a process of having experts review manuscript submissions to determine the quality to be published. You want to make sure that the articles you're choosing are using single case research designs as the methodology. So we don't want qualitative research, we don't want case study research, and we don't want group design. It needs to be an single case design, perhaps an ABAB withdrawal design, a multiple baseline or multiple probe design, or perhaps an alternating treatment design. If you have a question about that, feel free to email me. But we've been studying those designs and you can see examples in your textbook for reference. You're going to use the Piedmont Library EBSCO host search engine. Right? It's not advisable to Google your topic because you want to make sure that you're finding all of the relevant and recent literature. You can choose specific journals to look through, to hand search, to look for relevant articles, and then just make sure that you've picked your topic and you know the direction you're taking. Once you have found the articles that you want to include in your report, you have to read them and get information that is relevant to your purpose. So the first thing that I might suggest that you do is either develop a database in Excel or a Word document table and create categories so that as you read your articles, you will be able to code the important information that you're going to need to report on. Some of the most important pieces of information that you're going to need to document would be the reference, okay, who wrote this article. The important information there are authors' last names and the year of publication. And in the full reference, of course, you need the article title, the journal name, and the volume number and page number. But within the article, you're going to want to know the participant and setting information. What was the intervention or the independent variable? Was there procedural fidelity check on that? You want to describe the dependent variable, what was measured, and was there inter-observer agreement checks on there any social validity data collected, and what were the results. And remember, when we're reporting results, we're looking at visual analysis. We're noting the changes across conditions, so change in level between the baseline condition to the intervention condition, a change in trend. Were there replications of effect when they return to baseline or across tiers in a multiple baseline? And we want to identify the quality and rigor of the study. So what does that mean? Well, you may remember this article that's been assigned to you already this week, and hopefully you've read it. It's the Horner et al. 2005. I do strongly urge you to read that article because it is going to help guide you through all the important parts of articles. As we move forward, you're going to need to have that information. Let's take a quick look, and I'll point out some features of the article. First of all, it's the use of single subject research to identify evidence-based practice in special education. Now, in the recent adoption of the 6th edition of the APA Publication Manual, it's a new emphasis on bias-free language, and the term subject has been replaced or is expected to be changed. So it is not typically referred to as single subject research anymore. The subject, what is referring to the participant or the student. So it is now called single case research, not to be confused with case study. That's a qualitative research methodology. Single subject research, a quantitative research methodology that with a number of replications of effect, we can get a cause-effect relationship. Now, this article provides a nice description of quality single-case research and indicates that single subject research has proven particularly relevant for defining educational practices at the individual level. And that is because special education, we need to eliminate some of these group designs that do not particularly lend itself to making educational decisions for students with special education. It goes on to say that because single subject research documents experimental control, it's an approach like randomized control group design that may be used to establish evidence-based practices. So this article aims to tell the defining features of single case research methodology, clarify any of the relevance of the single case research methods for special education specifically, and it wants to offer criteria for determining when single case research results are sufficient so that we can document evidence-based practices. So that is why I want you to look at this, because I want you to know as you are reading your articles what is important to take note of. That means that it's good research and it's relevant information that you would want to share in a literature review. So we go on here to the end under participant and settings. All right, so single case research requires operational definitions of the participant setting and the process by which the participants were selected. So this is relevant information for you to share in your review. In terms of the dependent variable, it gives a list of what are the features. So we want dependent variables to be operationally defined. That means your definition, what it is, that behavior that's changing. We want to know exactly what it looks like so it can be directly observed, whether it's a physical movement of the child or if it's a permanent product of a result of a test. It needs to be described and then measured repeatedly. So over time, this is not pre-test and post-test. Your baseline condition, or all conditions for that matter, need at least 3 data points, and they need to be stable. So the measurement of the behavior across the same individual, across phases and conditions, allows a comparison to see those patterns of performance so that we can establish experimental control and a functional relation between the independent variable and the dependent variable. But we need to make sure that that dependent variable is recorded consistently, and that's where we get in the need for our inter-observer agreement, a second observer to collect data alongside the primary data collector. And those data need to be carefully compared. And then, of course, it is important that they're selected for social significance. So that's that social validity piece. The independent variable is a very important factor to consider in the journal article. The independent variable in single case research typically is the practice, the intervention, whatever is under investigation. So we want to be able to accurately replicate those procedures. So it needs to be described with great detail. In order to document experimental control, the independent variable in single subject research is actively rather than passively manipulated. So at certain points in time, it is not being provided, and at certain points in time, it is. And those are the conditions that are compared. And of course, to get reliability of your procedures, you need to be sure that it is implemented with fidelity. The baseline or the comparison condition is similar to that treatment as usual condition. So it needs to be described, and the dependent variable needs to be measured during this condition, just as it is during the intervention condition, so we can get a predictable pattern. Okay, so then during the experimental condition, in most cases, experimental control is demonstrated when the design documents 3 demonstrations of the experimental effect at 3 different points in time, or across different participants, within one participant or across different participants. So that's 3 replications of effect, or how we can mark off most threats to internal validity. So the design itself is something you would want, helps you to demonstrate that experimental effect. So the documentation of experimental control is achieved there through the introduction and withdrawal of the independent variable, or the staggered introduction of the independent variable, which would be a multiple baseline. Or if you have the iterative manipulation, where you're randomly alternating different treatments across observation periods, that would be alternating treatment design. So here we have an example of a withdrawal design where we have a baseline intervention. We have replication of effect. And then it goes on to show you multiple baseline, where you have staggered on a time-lagged introduction of the intervention, and noting that the baseline data are stable prior to intervention. And visual analysis is key to evaluating single case research. So we're looking at trend, level, variability of performance, as well as the percentage of non-overlapping data. So documentation of that functional relation requires a compelling demonstration of an effect based on that visual analysis. Social validity should be reported in all single case research articles, with emphasis on the selection of the dependent variables having social importance, that the independent variable is applied with fidelity, and demonstration that the typical intervention agents report procedures to be acceptable and feasible. So teachers and anyone who would be administering those would find those to be appropriate. And lastly, demonstration that the intervention produced an effect that met a clinical need. So it was what behavior change? That was an important behavior change. And then lastly, we have a list here of research questions, because once you write your literature review and you talk about the participant setting materials, dependent variable, independent variable, experimental design, and how the experimental control is established and replications of effect occurred, you are going to write a research question of your own. And here are some examples. We're going to talk about that in a minute in the PowerPoint, but I just wanted to review this article with you so that you could see what was important to draw out of it. A lot of times people find academic writing to be kind of boring and difficult to understand, so I wanted to point out why it was important and what I wanted you to see within it. And finally, let's talk a bit about how to use that literature review. Well, you need to tell about your topic and build a rationale for your study that you're going to be proposing in this class. So how are you going to use the lit review? So that you can identify the best research methods to use in your proposal for your study. You may even want to do a systematic replication of a study that you have reviewed in your literature review. Let's take a look. First, when you write your literature review, you're going to introduce the topic. So you start your paper off. Of course, you've got your title page, you've got your abstract page, and then you start your paper. Title of your paper, it's at the top of that third page. And you're going to give the introduction to your topic, starting with a broad statement. What is your topic? And then some general introductory remarks. What is the topic in more detail? Who are some of the people that came up with the idea originally? And then your thesis. What is the purpose of your paper? Well, I'll go ahead and tell you. It's to review research on the topic. As a matter of fact, you're going to say you reviewed 4 articles and that you have included a table for their reference. And that's where you're going to include that 1-page abstract table that you've already created right into your paper. Okay, so once you have that first section done, then you're going to provide a summary of the existing literature. So you're going to describe the 4 articles, right? You can have a couple of options. Options approach might be, the contrasting options approach would be you're going to describe the 4 studies and you're going to contrast the different studies. And then you build a rationale for your proposed study. What are you going to put in that description of your studies? Well, you're going to just talk about who did what to whom under what conditions. So you'll talk about the participants of each study, experimental design, the intervention, what were the measurement to show change, how are you going to, or what was done to ensure there was inter-observer agreement for valid and reliable measurement. And then you're going to describe what the data say about the results. So was there a change in level and trend? Was it a high P&D across conditions? And then what does it mean? You restate the purpose and the major conclusions from the article, and you identify any limitations to their research and how it implies future practice. So you do that for each of the 4 articles. So your final section of your lit review is just going to be to say, this might be where you differentiate across the articles. Each of these articles may have been about a math strategy, but 2 of them used a multiple baseline across participants design, and 2 used a multiple baseline across behaviors design. But in all, it seems as if the primary single case design to use for an academic study would be a multiple baseline or probe design. So you could say something like that. But the intervention itself was effective across all 4 studies, leading me to my research question. And then you write your research question. Now you're thinking like, how do I write a research question? Well, research questions direct your focus during your study, so they're very important to orient your reader. So the format for single case research is going to be including 3 parts: participants, your independent variable, and your dependent variable. Okay, so the format might be, does X independent variable influence Y dependent variable for Z participants? And in real terms, an example might be, does the use of the RAP, reading comprehension strategy, have an effect on reading passage comprehension quizzes? And maybe we could add to that for students with learning disabilities. So there's an idea. Go with it. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm here to help. Bye.